And we have returned with another episode of Homerbound, a podcast where a couple of nerds read through and discuss Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. I'm Llama.
I'm Wriste.
I actually managed to introduce us this time. That was great success.
Well, I will say when you said we have returned, it sounds like we've gone on our own Odyssey to collect this podcast and bring it back. And now we have it, and we've delivered it. No,
it's an interesting interpretation of that. I would definitely say that we're on our own little Odyssey.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I feel like we are right now because both you and I are in places that are having very stormy, rainy afternoons right now.
Absolutely. I am like Odysseus on that raft, being buffeted by winds and waves. Not really. It's just a bit of thunder outside. If you hear if thunder makes it in and you hear like weird rumbling, that's why Zeus is listening.
Yeah, I've poured out the wine for both of us.
You said you actually poured out wine.
I actually did. I was just like, you know what? We've joked about this enough that I feel like I actually have to do it just once. I mean, it's a $10 box of wine.
Sure.
So like,
what, like you're at the kitchen sink, you've poured it, and you like look both ways, and you like tip some in, and then you come back to your computer.
No, I poured it out into the sink, and then I was like, this one is for you, Zeus. Please be a homie tonight. I literally said that out loud.
Nice. I was hoping you said you actually poured it onto the floor or something, but no such luck.
No, I don't. No, I'm sorry. I'm not cleaning that up.
It's fair.
But in any case, the wine has been poured.
Libations have been made.
Not currently into my mouth. I'm drinking tea as per usual. So there will be no wine for me yet. Depending on how bad the thunder gets, I might reconsider that. But yeah, so we're back for books 7 and 8 of the Odyssey. And before we truly get into it, I'm just gonna issue our usual little content warning. We curse, we are immature, and we like naughty words. There are some themes of violence and other adult mature themes involving hugging and kissing and other such acts.
Talked about dongs last episode.
We did talk about dongs last episode, and we'll probably be doing more of that this episode because there's some more stuff. The song from the bard.
Right, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So we'll get to that later because I believe that's in book 8.
Yes.
But yeah, so there's our little content warning. Be advised, but we hope you enjoy some more time with us as we talk about. Let's start with book 7, which in my little outline I said, book 7 is called A Magical Kingdom, not Disney. That's what I said in my little notes. So we have found ourselves in Phaeacia. That's what I'm going with for my pronunciation of that. And Odysseus has made it up to the palace. And
well, he's in town. He's not at the palace yet. Remember, he follows Nausicaa, right? Nausicaa in, and then he lets her go up ahead. He hangs out at Athena's little clearing. And Nausicaa has told him to anyone can tell him where the palace is. Everyone knows where the king and queen's palace is, and so that's
no. You're absolutely right. You know what that was too? Is like I did my reread of it today, so I'm like, we're there.
Yeah, we're already in the palace. We get to the palace pretty quickly.
We do get to the palace pretty quickly. So Athena disguises herself as a little girl and leads Odysseus up the path to the palace.
Can I just say this is the deep hard-hitting analysis and critique that people are listening for. Can I just say this scene is super fucking cute.
Little pigtailed Athena?
So Athena shows up. She shows up as a little girl. She has a jug of water, or a water pitcher, which is it's oh, what do I carry to make myself to sell the role? I'll carry a water pitcher. and like she calls him Mr. Foreigner, or that's how it's rendered in any case. And when she leads Odysseus asks her, can you get me to the palace? And when she leads him there, it describes her as like skipping, and one of the lines is rendered as pigtailed Athena.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. She's got little piggy tails.
Yeah, and I actually did check the Fagel's translation. I'm suspecting that this is a rendering of like braided or whatever. I can't remember what the Fagel's
plaited.
The Fagel's translation had something like that, like Athena with the braided hair or something like that, or with her braided hair. Of course, if you're like a young girl, like that would probably look like pigtails, and so that's how she's chosen to render it, and it makes modern sense, and it seems like a pretty reasonable rendering of what I would imagine the original word. Of course, none of us here can read or speak or whatever the original ancient Greek, but it's just a guess.
Not speak ancient Greek.
It's super
or
cute.
Understand it or read it or anything. Yeah, it is really cute. There have been a few times throughout Emily Wilson's translation where I've kind of been taken a little bit askance by like what was just seemed like a really modern rendering of a phrase that like I'm sure fits with the Greek. I think one of them I like brought up when we had Dr. Dan on, and he was like, no, that's pretty much what the Greek says. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I vaguely remember that.
I think it was like a phrase of some kind.
It may have been, no, I think it may have been when they mentioned Helen drugging people, the like, putting the drugs in the wine to drug
that was
Menelaus
and
Odysseus.
Book 3 though, right? That was book 4. So
I'm not sure that I remember exactly when this happened, but like I just know that I was taken off by the fact, and I think it was the word narcotics in that instance. That,
it was narcotics.
That kind of tripped me because like it sounds so legalese to me in a kind of way, but at the same time, like that is essentially what it is, what they're talking about in that one instance. And it may well be that like the Greek word for that is really similar. I don't know. This has gone off onto a little bit of a tangent, but
like I was also going to say, like on that note, there was also one instance where I can't remember what book it was, but it was like Demeter with cornrows in her hair. Like that's also like an obvious modernized rendering, but I would suspect that like it works, like it's probably like similarly a rendering of like braided or something like that.
I think like the thing for me is that each time that this has caught me a little bit off guard, I've also been surprised by how much I kind of like it, like in the sense that like the words that she's using in this translation just make sense to me. It makes sense within the context. It's just like every now and then there will be one particular turn of phrase where I'm just like, wait a minute, that sounds like how we talk.
I don't know if you remember any like if you did like world history, or not world history, like world literature. I'm sure you've done world history, but like or like early world literature. I took one of those classes in college, and one of the things that we read was the Lysistrata, or Lysistrata, play by Aristophanes, I believe. It's a comedy, but the way that it was translated, like, was ultra modernized. Like people were referring to people with like Irish accents. Pizza was brought up.
That's wild.
But I mean, it's one of those interesting features of like when we think of like video games, or I'm a gamer, so I think of video games, or even like anime or movies brought to us from, say, like Japan. It's not just a matter of like translating one thing to another. We also have to think about like how does it make sense locally. So we have this thing called localization, and that's where we have to take like certain liberties, and that's kind of what's happening, like not only across geography but across time as well. So I find that really interesting. Like, again,
it
like
makes total sense,
cornrows.
and like you can kind of see it at work here. Like this is it's one of the things that like makes this such an interesting translation to read for me. Like I've been captivated by this translation because I think all of my experiences previously are with like Fagles, or the Robert Fitzgerald copy of the Odyssey that I had from my childhood. That just seem much more like they are aware of the classicism, like of the classicsness of it all, and they are writing into that
Yes.
kind of portrayal of things. This doesn't feel as much like that to me.
Yeah, like when you approach the classics or any like honestly any older tome or classic book, like you kind of expect a certain kind of style, right? Like there's a sort of loftiness or stiffness that
It's the like tweedy patched elbows feeling.
yeah, or like
Personified in a feeling.
yeah, or some guy like raising his arms and speaking as he would speak to like the gods or whatever. But this is also like two people. Even I'm curious as to what the rendering of this is of. Like even at the very start in book one, in the proem, is it now goddess child of Zeus? This is the poet speaking. Now goddess child of Zeus, tell us the old story for our modern times. Find the beginning. Like that's obviously a very if Dr. Emily Wilson is like putting her fingerprints all over this this translation, that would be like the really clean print that we find. Like that's one she's trying to leave. This modernized translation.
Yeah, totally.
Anyway, I've gotten us off track.
No, it's fine. I mean, I think we've both had our own part in that because, that's the fun of it. But I don't know. I'm gonna keep going on the tangent. Actually, I'm not gonna lie. I have one more thought to add to that.
Oh yeah, okay.
Which is simply that this gets me to thinking, and especially that portion of the poem that you just brought up gets me to thinking like, how interesting would it have been to see this as a new work in the oral tradition as people were able to see it back then. And this kind of reminds me of that because it feels fresh. Like when we're talking about this translation and localizing and modernizing, it feels fresh. It feels like I'm reading something new almost. And it's more exciting to me than like some of the other translations for that reason.
I think it would be insane to have a rendering of the text that is for lack of a better word rappable. Like I think that would be like that would be the like ideal modernization of this like sort of thing, or like spoken word poetry or whatever. Like I think that would be super super cool. I imagine someone's done it, but I would have I have no way of finding it.
Yeah, for sure.
That's also
okay. So now I will take us back off the tangent.
Okay.
And we can actually get into this. So I told you all that this would be chaos with me at the helm. I just want to say that. I told you all. So Odysseus, now, with Athena in her adorable little pigtails, is led up to the house. And as they go up there, she kind of gives him some of the background on, like, the family who, rule over this kingdom. There's another really cool name in here, Rexenor.
Rexenor, where is that?
It's, like, around line 65-ish.
Oh, yeah, okay, yes.
Just, that gave me some Astyanax
That's
vibes.
all right. I don't know, Astyanax has so many twists and turns in it.
Astyanax is still, like, way better. But it just, Rexenor sounds like that equal kind of level of, like, that has to have been a cool kid. I refuse to believe that kid wasn't cool.
Oh, we have no idea. He could have been, like, a huge villain. It's totally possible, given Greek.
Well, I mean, Apollo shot him to death, so I'm thinking probably no.
Well, I think that just means that he was, like, he fell ill and died.
That is a probably correct interpretation of that. Yeah.
Also, since we're on this passage, I don't know if you're going to bring it up or if we're just going to skip over it, but Alcinous, I believe, I believe is how you pronounce the name. King Alcinous is married to his niece.
I mean, okay, so I will say that, like, it's worth bringing up. I don't know that I necessarily thought to do it because I've read a lot of historical stories.
This is normal for you.
many of them involve, incestuous relations. And so it's not that it doesn't bother me, but it just is kind of commonplace for things I've read about. So it doesn't flip that switch in my head as much as it used to.
It doesn't.
Maybe not the best thing.
Yeah, I'm just bringing it up because like it's there.
It is.
It's not
there,
really
and
brought
there's
up. Nothing.
A reason that we're being told about it. Like, as I've said before, I think there's a reason for like everything that we get told about, whether you kind of know it or not. They had to write it down for a reason.
Yeah, I don't know. I actually don't know why it's there. Because again, I don't remember
honestly
it coming up
think,
later. I don't know why it
I
was.
think it's one of those things like in the Iliad where they would just kind of just describe someone's lineage so that you know that this person that you're about to see a bunch of, like, where they came from and how they got where they are. So for me, it strikes me kind of similarly to that. And I think also Athena is telling Odysseus this because she's trying to enable him to like supplicate to them well and be greeted as like not just any guest, but a very good guest who knows about the people who are about to take him in and take them under their wing.
Yeah, I guess it is important to notice this is not being told to us by the poet. This is being told to Odysseus by Athena. Whereas in like the Iliad, this would be something that the poet would probably be saying.
And this is like, another one of those instances of Athena kind of holding Odysseus's hand throughout so much of the Odyssey. And her putting him in a position where he will eventually find his way out, but it's still like a game to the rest of the gods in some ways, or at least certainly to Poseidon, or maybe not a game, but just like a vendetta. Or, he's just messing with him so hard.
Yeah. I don't know.
But this is Athena's way of kind of, I think, holding his hand through it and being like, it's going to be okay. I'm not going to let you,
If we're to understand it from like a purely utilitarian perspective, like Odysseus has never been here before. He doesn't know anything about this place. He just knows that there's a king, there's a queen, and he met their daughter. And so Athena is like filling him in on like he's more now in the know of where he is, whereas before he knew like nothing. So like that knowledge, like knowing where, I mean, I guess it's one of those things where like much how we, I guess, take our ability to identify each other for granted, kind of like how we talked about with Telemachus and stuff. Like we sort of take knowing where we are for granted as well. Like we have like we can go anywhere in the world pretty much and have like a vague, even like a super vague understanding of that area's history. But here, that's not the case, right? He may have never heard of this place before. He would have no idea like what sort of people he's dealing with. So something like this would probably impart some kind of understanding like what we would like inherit through like, just running into random information or something like that.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, like we all have these repositories of instant knowledge in our hands. And you can look anything up and know anything about anyone or any time period. Pretty much if you want to find it out and it's available, you can do it on a smartphone, which many people have today. So like it's not to be taken for granted that Odysseus would have been ass backwards here, like, and just not knowing at all what's going on or where he is or what these people are like. Although I think at this point he would have had some idea from Nausicaa of the kind of people that he was dealing with, just given her response to him being one of welcoming and, helping.
And of course, if we're to weigh this eventual this encounter against like Telemachus's visit with Nestor or even Menelaus, we now have an instance where neither party really knows who the other person is. As for Telemachus knew who Nestor and Menelaus were. He had a sense of who they were. He knew where he was going. Odysseus has no idea, or very little idea, and now he has some because Athena's told him.
Yeah, and I think this is like where we start getting into the Odysseus's journey. Obviously, is the highlight of this poem. There's a lot of other stuff going on with his son, but his journey is like the biggest part of it. And his journey really focuses on the stranger guest, which I know, like, there's a lot of guest right, and then there is stranger guest right. And from what I know, which is admittedly rather little about it, but like from what I do know, the stranger guest has like an even more kind of specific role. And they were like really weird and superstitious about it, in the sense of like if you did a stranger guest wrong, it could really like curse you. Or
there have been a couple parts where people have said like, strangers and wanderers, like they are of Zeus, and Zeus like looks over them or after them. I'll offer an additional bit of stuff that I can't properly source, but that I seem to know, which is that one of the reasons, again, this is like purely like out of my ass. I know this, but I'm not sure why I know this. One of the reasons why you would like greet a stranger in this way and treat them well is because they might be a god. And
exactly.
And so, which again, we can look to Nestor. Like it's exactly the case. He properly observed Xenia. He met these strangers. He gave them the good seats. He gave the oldest one, who in this case was Athena, disguised as mentor, the first toast or drink or whatever, and she happened to be a god. And it's like, yeah, here you go. Like this is a nice little like ideal object lesson where, okay, he did this right, and he did it because of that particular reason. And again, I have no way of knowing if this is actually true, but
yeah, no, I mean, I think you're actually probably spot on with that, because that has the ring of truth to me. But so like this is what I find really interesting is from this point on, we kind of get to see the guest stranger thing from that person's point of view, like from Odysseus's point of view pretty directly. And it just gets so fascinating for me. It's one of the reasons that I really love this book, because you're getting it from his point of view. I don't know. I just think that's so cool.
As we go, I'll probably contest that this is like, I mean, we are following Odysseus. I'm not sure if this is from his point of view, because again, like there's a lot of black boxiness going on with a lot of the characters. But yeah, sure.
That's true.
We can put a tag in that.
So maybe perhaps not from his point. No, I'm going for it now. Absolutely. Maybe not from his point of view, but certainly like with a specific focus on his thoughts on the process.
Yes.
Because it continually taps into his emotions and his feelings.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
And his experience of it. So maybe it's less like his point of view, but from his experience.
From what I remember, as I said, I remember there being a lot of, and maybe this is just a staple of like ancient Greek storytelling. As I said, there's a lot of like mysteriousness about how these characters say what they say. Like, as we'll discover in some books after the ones that we're covering, Odysseus will tell a long story, and we're not really told what he's saying or thinking, or what he's thinking as he's telling them. We sort of have to guess. And I guess if you're a poet delivering it, you wouldn't have to tell people how it's said. But like that, I guess inner working of Odysseus's mind, it depends on how much credit you want to give him, and it depends on I guess what you think of him, like what the motives and machinations of his are going. I can actually point out a part here where I think this is exemplified. If you'd like, we can sort of
go for it.
Also, off the back of what we talked about with like Circe's island being described like extensively, this
Oh
place is
yeah, the
described
royal house.
extensively as well. Like there's like gold and silver statues of like dogs and boys, and there are a lot of there's a lot of slave girls, and like everyone there is super talented and all that stuff. There's a lot of trees, there's fruits. This place is super
There's-
awesome. Like Emily Wilson calling this a magical kingdom, I think points quite appropriately to like just how idyllic a place this is.
This is absolute paradise. Like incredible, lush, gorgeous, anything you could ever want paradise. As I said before with the other description, I want to go on vacation here. Like it sounds marvelous.
Yeah, absolutely. So the part where I can use as an example of what I'm talking about here is when Odysseus grasps how's this pronounced? It's Arete?
I have no idea.
Hold on, it's
I'm not gonna lie.
I feel like we need to
I was just gonna call her the queen.
I feel like we need to figure this out. I should have figured this out earlier. Yeah, Arete.
My
There it
guess
is.
would be Arete.
Yeah, Arete.
Okay.
So he supplicates Queen Arete. Oh, also, and he does call her child of Rhexenor.
Child of
So he does
Rhexenor.
use the information that that Athena gave him, which I guess I just noticed.
She gave him spark notes.
Yeah. Anyway, he gives this this very impassioned plea for help. But as we talked about in the last episode, you know, we talk a lot about like the act of supplication, you know, the grasping of the knees and the, I guess, delivering of a plea of some kind, whether it's plea to be taken as for ransom instead of being killed, or asking for help, or requesting a promise from Zeus if you're Thetis. But here, when Odysseus, I guess, supplicated Nausicaa at a distance, we got to look at like the actual words, like because it is a verbal communication, and Odysseus is very he's very calculated and specific. He flatters her, and then he asks for help, and he shows that he doesn't mean them any harm. He keeps his privacy, or he tries to keep his privacy as best he can. Like he washes himself and all that stuff. And like I don't believe him for a second when he says I'm too shy to be like scrubbed down or anything like that.
Definitely not.
He's but he wants as much, I guess, plausible deniability as possible when he's like walking on a knife's edge. And this part, and again, we're not really told what kind of attitude he's going at this with, but is he like we can imagine like two different ways of reading this, right? When he begs Arete to grant him help for passage home. This is a real like impassioned plea that is like, I guess, from the heart or what have you, as like someone overwhelmed with like grief and whatnot would offer, or, and these aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but or this is something that Odysseus has been practicing in his head along the way. This is much like his supplication to Nausicaa, this is a performance. There's a performative aspect to supplication, as well as a, you know, verbal and active component. And I guess that's what I'm pointing to when I say we don't really know exactly what's going on in Odysseus's head. Is this like a very, obviously he wants to get home. I'm not calling that into question, but like, is this like earnest, or is this like, you know, what we would expect of someone who knows what's expected of someone who's in his position and is doing that, I guess.
So I think I read it as earnest, at least in part because there's the portion shortly thereafter where he's talking to Alcinous, and it says with careful calculation. And the other thing that also leads me to earnest is a kind of little bit of a throwaway part of a line where, half starved and weak, the hero ate and drank. And that to me says like he's still a little beaten up by the journey, he's hungry, he's
Well, so when
tormented.
I question his earnestness, I'm not exactly talking about, you know, like, obviously he wants help, obviously he wants to get back home, but like if I wanted something from you, like let's say I wanted, I don't know, a cupcake, and I know that
Do make very good cupcakes.
and now however I go about it, that desire will be earnest, right? I've heard the great things about your
Sure.
cupcakes, and like there are degrees to which I could potentially go to try to get one from you. It could be a more of a, I guess, spur of the moment where I would like, you make cupcakes, like can I get a cupcake? Or I can like plan in advance, like, okay, I know she, like, I can flatter her, and then I can talk about, oh, I love cupcakes. So like, oh, you have cupcakes? Oh, could I have one? Like, obviously, in stuff like that, like one would obviously be more like calculated, or yeah, one would be more calculated than the other. Which is not to say that like the desire to have a cupcake or whatever it is I'm asking from you
Sure.
is not earnest. Like obviously I want them. Obviously Odysseus wants help. But when he is like begging for this, is this, how performative is it for him, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that there's ever going to be a way to completely tell that. But I
Yeah, of
also
course.
think that, like, I don't know. I think there are kind of hints, though, at least to me, or this could just be my interpretation and speculation, that, like, when he is being calculating, I don't think it's out of a sense of, like, wanting to mess with people. It's more out of a sense of self-protection. And
Yeah. I mean, he wouldn't
that
do this to mess with them.
reads. No, I know, but, like, that reads to me as someone who is earnestly begging and probably playing into it at least a little bit, just to, like, so there almost certainly is a performative aspect to
Mhm.
it, because that's the culture. Like, the act of supplication is kind of supposed to be dramatic and really convince someone, oh my god, I have to help this person, they're supplicating to me, they're desperate, they need
Mhm.
this. So I think that there's always going to be some performative part of it that, like, you almost kind of have to do. It, like, is dictated by carrying out the act in itself.
Yeah.
So in that, I think you might be kind of right, but I don't think that negates the earnestness of it. I just think that is part of the ritual.
I suppose so. Yeah. I don't know. It's like also, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. In book 8, but there's like, you know, there's the part where Odysseus like kind of wiggles his way into the games or whatnot, right? Where he sort of
I'm not sure I'd say wiggled so much as is goaded into, but
yeah, sort of.
we'll definitely
Yeah.
get that
Um,
later.
or again, even like we can take the much more long-winded, extravagant version in a in a previous book. I think it was it book 6? Yeah, it was book 6 where Odysseus uh speaks to Nausicaa. Like obviously, you know, obviously there's the, like, he's still, you know, doing the thing, but he's doing it in a very Odysseus way. Like the Odysseus way is like tricky and clever and calculated and all that stuff. He has
Yeah,
a
but I think
mind
that's
to
because,
manipulate
like, at
people, I
this
suppose.
point, but at this point, I think he's learned that that gets him out of trouble.
Well, yeah, I
Like,
think
think
he's. I
about
mean,
everything
I suspect
that
he's
we
always
know
known
that
that.
he's ever done up to this
Yeah,
point. It has always helped him, so why would he stop doing
I'm
that?
not saying that he should stop necessarily. I'm just saying that,
No,
like,
no, no, I get it,
again,
but
it's like, how do you read Odysseus in
I
this
read it
moment?
as a learned pattern of someone who is very shrewd and clever and cunning, who has used that to get himself out of a lot of trouble. But I also, again, this I think gets back to my thing about mutual exclusivity. Like, just because he's manipulative doesn't necessarily make him not
Yeah,
earnest.
of course. I guess the better way of putting it would be, is like, is this action of his more reflective of his shrewdness or what have you, or is it more reflective of,
Coming from an earnest
I
place.
guess, yeah, I guess earnestness.
I think I still fall with the latter, just because when he is being more manipulative and cunning, we are usually told that, like, explicitly, which happens pretty much right after this.
Yeah.
Because then it goes into, with Oh, where is it? Odysseus with careful calculation said, and then I think this is where he's talking about getting him into the games or something like that.
No, this is like the games don't happen until
That's the
until
next
book 8.
book.
This I believe.
Oh, this is when Alcinous is trying to get him to like talk to him.
Yeah.
They're basically asking. So basically, what happens is Odysseus enters and supplicates to the queen. She accepts this. Alcinous and Arete welcome him and start performing all of these guest rites to welcome him. They feed him. There's a bunch of stuff that is gone into in great detail. And then after all of that is done, Alcinous is kind of like, so, who are you?
So he doesn't actually, and just rereading this part, Alcinous doesn't actually ask him directly who he is. He more like speculates to him, almost, right? He says, this is also something that characters say regularly, like you must endure whatever it is Zeus throws at you, and he says this, or whatever fate throws at you, and he says this, and like this is a little bit before line 200, right? Once he's made his journey, King Alcinous says, "You must endure whatever was spun out when he was born by fate and by the heavy ones, the spinners. But if he is immortal," speaking of Odysseus, "come from heaven, the gods have changed their ways, since in the past they used to show themselves to us directly, blah, 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 blah." And he's saying this to Odysseus, so saying that he might be, like, or not necessarily to Odysseus, but like around him, right? Like, oh, he might be a god, which is why Odysseus is replying, "No, I'm not a god. I'm very much a man." And so the careful calculation.
Very shortly after that, Arete does literally ask him who he is, which is more what I was referring to.
Oh yeah. Sure. Yeah, no.
But I think your point is well taken, though, that they are kind of, and this is kind of going back to what we were talking before about, how a guest stranger might come and you might think, oh, this could be a god. I should probably treat them well because this could possibly be a god. I mean, I think this is like a perfectly tangible example of that.
What I liked a lot about this book, it's also super short, by the way, which is not what I like about this book. But
the past 3 books have been so short.
But what I do like is that this book shows that Odysseus. Like saying with careful calculation, like he's not like with the previous passage where he's speaking with careful calculation. When he replies to the prospect that he might be a god, he is like working to convince them of like things that might prove that he is not a god, right? Like, I'm a man, I get hungry, tired, I'm sad, and I need help, and I have places to go.
How relatable is that?
Yeah, and then following that, he's confronted with a question which might incriminate Nausicaa in having met him before he met them. Where Arete asks,
and he like absolves her of that and is like, no, this was my idea.
Well, Arete asks specifically, who gave you those clothes? I thought you said you drifted here by sea, which also cashes in on Athena's evaluation of Arete as being like a very clever woman. That is a good question. You drifted here by sea, and yet you have these nice clothes, or because he's wearing what Nausicaa gave him, and so he has to explain what happened, and he has to do so in a way that is plausible, does not incriminate Nausicaa, and also doesn't make her look bad, because in a way she is his host, so he has to be gracious to her as well.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that like a lot of the rendering of the story that he gives them is pretty true. Like, it's not completely true, but it's not also terribly off the mark for what has happened to him.
Well, yeah, he basically says like in his answer to Arete, he's like, I came across also last episode I mentioned that he said that he was from an island called Uh,
Ogygia? Ogygia?
Ojija, I believe is how it's put in the glossary. So I'll just call it Ojija. He was from Ojija, which was not necessarily true. I guess I missed or failed to remember that that is the name of the island. That is the name of
That
Calypso's
he's on with
island.
Calypso.
And he says this, like, this is where I got here. This is how I got here. I was set upon by Poseidon, and he even recounts how he almost got dashed up against the rocks, and then he made his way to shore, and he tells all of the things up to the part where he, for lack of a better word, I guess conspired. I was gonna say schemed, but I think conspired is a better word. Where he conspired with Nausicaa to have him appear in, I guess, an organic way that doesn't incriminate her as having like done something wrong. And so he, like, his last line was Nausicaa was so kind to me, she gave me food and wine and had them wash me in the river, which is kind of a half truth. And
I like the part where he completely neglects to mention that he jumped out of a bush completely fucking naked.
as he should have. I think that's,
No, for sure.
I think that's pretty, like,
It's just kind of funny.
That's
like,
a fair
it's...
omission, I think. Like, yeah, when I met your
Absolutely.
daughter, I was like,
I'm not
fucking
saying it's
naked.
not. It just it's always funny to me when you get to read something like that and you have already, like, it's like in a movie when you've seen the scene that the person is telling the other person about, but they're giving them like a very watered down version of it, and you're just like,
he's only giving him the necessary details, right? Like he says, like, she was so kind to me, she gave me food and wine, she had them wash me in the river, and she let me have these clothes. Now I've told you the truth no matter what. And it's true. He left out the...
Yeah. It is a lie of omission, you know, and a smart one, because you shouldn't tell them that. And especially since, you know, Alcinous's response to that is basically, oh, well, you know, she should have brought you here. She should have continued that act of guest hospitality since you supplicated to her first. And this is when Odysseus covers for her.
Yeah, he covers her.
And is like, you know, this was my idea. You know, I was embarrassed. I thought you wouldn't want me here. I thought you would be suspicious.
And this is actually a really interesting part. It's coming back to me now. I read this yesterday and I thumbed through it again earlier today. But now that we're here, this is a super interesting part. And again, I keep going back to our talk with Dr. Christensen on book 9, and like that's kind of what I'm talking about, right? Where like the inner workings of anyone's mind, but especially Odysseus's, depend hugely on how much credit we want to give him.
Yeah.
And this part where he says, I thought you might get annoyed at seeing me. We humans on this earth are apt to be suspicious. Obviously, Odysseus is describing himself. He is extraordinarily suspicious of people. We saw a little example of that, I guess, with like in his response to Calypso, but I think it'll be more like hammered in and real when we see like how he interacts with other people and how he like will spin stories about who he is that are obviously not true. And that's because he himself is suspicious. And Alcinous says like that isn't a concern you should have had. You know, we're fine people. And
he basically says, I don't like to get pissed off for no reason.
I don't know. I think it's very interesting that this is one of those things where it's like, okay, Odysseus, you might be projecting just a little bit.
I think so, but I also think it's like almost kind of a touchy exchange where there's the potential to say something that, like, again, he's gotten the Spark Notes version of this family from Athena, but he doesn't really know them. So this is, I think, like, also more self-protection.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Kind of throwing this out there, you know. And I think it does kind of rely on how much credit you give him. Like, is he... What is the kind of intent behind his couching of it this way?
Well, what's interesting to me is
I think it's a really interesting question.
well, in this little passage where he says, your daughter is quite wonderful, great king. Please do not blame her. She told me to come here with her slaves, but I was too embarrassed and nervous. I thought you might get annoyed at seeing me. We humans on this earth are apt to be suspicious. This is a little bit after line 300. The lie could have stopped at, I thought you might get annoyed at seeing me. But he has to couch it like, the best lies are couched in truth. If you can get me on board with, like, the way people are, then my generalization of, perhaps you'd be annoyed because people are suspicious, it sells the story better. And this doesn't, like, screw him or anything.
I think it does, but I also think it's just kind of relating over a common value that I think most people probably would have shared to at least some degree of, like, people have a tendency to be suspicious.
I suppose so. But Odysseus especially. Because again, like, we don't...
Oh, for sure.
Because we don't see much of...
I think you're definitely...
Sorry, go on.
I think you're definitely right about that. It is almost kind of a, like, the lady doth protest too much moment. Because it is very much of Odysseus's nature. And it's like, all right, Odysseus, we see where you're coming from.
It's not exactly the lady doth protest too much sort of thing. It's more like, when you make a claim about, like, people in general, like, I think people are this way, you're also, like, revealing a lot about yourself. Like, you have to. It's, like, by necessity. And so this is, I guess, a little part where he's doing that. That's like the biggest thing. I don't think he's protesting too much. I don't think he's like going too far with his lie or anything like that. It's just like, this is a bit of himself that we kind of already know is there, but now he's vocalizing it. He's externalized it in a very literal way.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right about that. It's an interesting kind of conundrum as to, like, or maybe not conundrum, but just it's a point of interest to kind of notice how he throws that out there.
Yeah, and I guess if we're to compare his statement to I guess what we've seen so far with Telemachus, going to Nestor and Menelaus, like, he wasn't greeted with suspicion, and here he also isn't greeted with suspicion. Obviously, this isn't like always the case. Like, there's, but like the biggest source of suspicion in the Odyssey, I think is very clearly Odysseus.
See, I'm not sure I would entirely say that. Because, like, I just think in a general kind of sense, the theme of someone going... Like, I see what you mean by that, but I just think sources of suspicion would have been many and unpredictable. So I don't think it's just Odysseus. I just think it is the kind of idea of a contrast between, like, the guest stranger that you're supposed to welcome in, but, like, sometimes that guest stranger could turn out to be someone awful. So people would have some suspicion. It's kind of why it's a conundrum in the first place. It's not just like this person could be a god, but this person could also be someone awful. But if it's a god and I turn them away, I'm boned.
Yeah. So, like, in the text, I don't know if that's come up, like, materially. Like, no one has said, like, oh, this this person might... Well, I guess maybe like at Menelaus's, when his guard is like, should I turn these people away? He doesn't say, like, oh, these people might be terrible people. But then Menelaus is very quick to be like, oh, no, absolutely. Why would you do that? I'm
not sure that it's explicitly referenced, but I think it is hinted to, definitely at times. And I think in some sense, the way that things are referenced so positively is also to infer the opposite side of that coin and what the negative could possibly be. It just requires you to do a little more of the mental work. That's just my personal opinion. Like, and this is why I kind of in some ways feel like this is still a little bit of an instruction manual at times, because it is implying that, like, there is a right way to do things. Not necessarily all the time, but I think there is that implication at a lot of junctures in the Odyssey. Mm. And so I think it's just one of those things where when you're pointing out good something is, and how welcoming or safe things are, you are also implying the unwelcoming and the unsafe, just not necessarily explicitly.
Yeah. I guess what the crux of what I'm saying is that the main source of suspicion toward one's fellow man comes more explicitly from Odysseus than anyone else, just because he's so aggressively
Yeah, I mean, I
wise.
think that's probably true, and it's because he is he's a sneaky snake, and a manipulator, but also, I don't know, the clever, the cunning, the witty, which are not really qualities that are really attributed to many other people in these books necessarily, with the exception of Athena, because they are having that two peas in a pod moment.
I suppose. I mean, yeah, like there's Penelope. Telemachus is
That's true.
given a little bit of that,
but those people are all associated with Odysseus. And that line is tied directly. So really, it's all generating from Odysseus and Athena.
Yeah.
That's at least how I see it, to an extent.
Yeah.
It's like the wife and the child are kind of an extension of the man here.
I can see that for sure. I'll have to think about it. It's yet another thing to put a pin in as I keep reading.
And I mean, as we kind of get close to wrapping up this book, as we get into the last few lines of this, one of the things that happens as Alcinous is talking to Odysseus is that he basically offers Nausicaa, his daughter, to him in marriage.
Yeah.
And he kind of knows that it's not really going to happen, but he's just like, I wish you would stay here and marry my own daughter and be my son. What a congenial man you are. Which cracks me up. But yeah, so like these people really take his words to heart and welcome him as fully as one possibly can, with these guest rights, and in essence, in their essence, they really welcome him in.
Well,
and are showing like the highest form of Xenia to him.
I guess we can say that Odysseus is gaining what goes beyond this hospitality towards strangers, because like I don't know if there's anything in a guest right or in this kind of system of things where the king should say or the host should say, I wish you would marry my daughters, right? Like Odysseus has gone well above and beyond what is necessary. He's presented himself in a very particular kind of way, as the text has made fairly clear, right? Like he's very careful with his words. He's very mindful. He flatters when necessary. He's vague when he needs to be. He's congenial, as Alcinous says, and so he's very much. As I said, it's. I guess it goes back to what I said earlier, where like, in a way, it is like, depending on how we want to see Odysseus, it's very performative. He is performing himself for these people, and not only will they help him, the king also would have him as his son-in-law. so he gets what he needs, and then
they love him. They love him. Yeah, and so they welcome him in, and daughters are offered, and then they all go to bed, and that's where we leave off the book. It is a short one. So on that note, I think we'll take our little break. And when we come back, we will get into book 8.
Yeah.
So see you then. Hello, dear listener, and thanks for sticking with us through our little break. We'll be back in just a couple minutes, but I'd like to take a moment during the break to thank a few people and give a little information about the podcast. First, thank you for listening. This podcast has no sponsor. We've produced everything in-house and on our own time. And if you all are enjoying the fruits of our labor, that is the best thanks that we can imagine. You can follow us on Twitter at Homer_bound for new episodes, or just watch our podcast page wherever you're listening to us now. I'd like to thank Wriste for inviting me along on this adventure, which has been such great fun. I'd also like to thank the composer and performer of all the music you've heard throughout the episode, who happens to be my dad. Thanks, Dad. You're the absolute best. I'd also like to thank Bubbo for her contributions to the audio, Webs2D for original art of my llama character, Total Love for additional art and graphic design, and Ghosty for graphic design as well. I'd like to thank our many guests for their time and expertise, and finally, an especially big thank you to Dr. Daniel, who closes out each show with additional insights on our discussions. We hope you'll consider reading along with us. We're using the Emily Wilson translation of the Odyssey, and while we try to keep things intelligible for those who are new to the story, you might get more out of our discussions if you've read ahead, so feel free to pause and return later after you've read up. We would also like to remind you to stay tuned after Wriste and I have finished, since Dr. Daniel will have some awesome words of wisdom to add to our discussion. All right, thanks for hanging out through our break, and I will give it back to me and Wriste for the second half of this episode of Homer Bound. And we're back. And I have refilled my tea. I know that you have availed yourself of some entertainment.
Yeah, I was playing a video game. It's pretty fun.
You did seem to be having a good amount of fun with it. I came back from break and I'm just like, are you playing video games?
That gamer focused.
But that being said, I mean, look, hey, this is how we met. This is how we know each other. We're gamer nerds. I'm all for it. I could have gone for like a round of Pokemon Unite or something,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's short. Hey, don't say, I'm having fun playing that game. Judge not lest ye be judged. I'm gonna find things to judge you about your video game playing style.
I'm afraid you actually can't do that because you're self-admittedly terrible at video games.
That doesn't mean I don't enjoy them. And that doesn't mean that I don't play technically difficult games. I'm playing Hollow Knight right now.
It's not that hard a game.
Come on.
Hollow Knight's easy. Anyone who says Hollow Knight's hard, lying or bad, either one.
I can't wait to see what people have to say about this. I don't know. I think a lot of people consider Hollow Knight to be a relatively difficult game. But
this is not a gaming podcast, so I will not explain why I think it's easy. However,
yeah, but yeah.
That is my stance. And if you want to know any more about my stance, you can email me to have a back and forth conversation about it in the email in the description, which may or not be there.
I encourage everyone to do this, by the way. Please,
or you can tweet me at the provided Twitter location, which may or may also not be provided.
Please make Wriste suffer for saying this. In any case, we both had a very amusing break, and now that I have my tea, and you have your invigoration from video gaming, and also your beverage, which you have apparently replenished.
Arizona green tea with ginseng and honey. Canned for your pleasure.
Why did you have to add the last part on?
It just seemed right.
Moving on. We're moving on. To book 8, The Songs of a Poet. I am just skipping over that completely. Onwards and certainly upwards. The Songs of a Poet. And I love this book. And I love the title of this book, The Songs of a Poet.
Why do you love this book?
Because I think, so this is like, taps into kind of every part of this oral tradition that we've talked about before. And to me, like, I know, so I read up a little bit about this chapter just because it fascinated me. I've read this chapter like 3 or 4 times now. And There was some discussion that I read about, like, people kind of thinking that in the blind bard who will be singing songs throughout this book, that there is almost kind of some representation of Homer as the poet.
Yeah, there is.
I know there's a lot of back and forth on that, and I don't necessarily want to take a side on that either way. I mean, I think on the whole, probably not, but who knows? I could be totally wrong, and I'm not a classicist, so, like, I got nothing. But I do think that I like where those people who think that there might be something there are coming from, because I do think that this really taps into the kind of heart of this book, some of the heart of, like, Homeric writing and storytelling, and I love that.
Yeah, as I mentioned, like this, maybe I didn't mention this specifically, but there's a focus on storytelling in the Odyssey. You know, we have the poet who's like a poet named Demodocus. Demodocus, maybe that's how you pronounce it, maybe not. Who tells his stories and sings his songs and makes Odysseus cry in much the same way Telemachus did in front of Menelaus. There's this one part when you when you mentioned this, there may be some self-insert there. I highlighted a line. This is like far up in the book, line 480, where Odysseus says, "Go take this meat and give it to the poet. Despite my grief, I would be glad to meet him. Poets are honored by all those who live on earth. Muse taught him how to sing. She loves the race of poets." And this, if you use your imagination for like 3 seconds, like this is something that would be said by a poet. The poet. It's it's like how writers love to write stories about writers. Like they help themselves. Like it's just something I like to do. So
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's almost even like a tiny bit of a fourth wall break, because it's like, it's the poet, and we're talking about the poet, and I'm the poet. Obviously, like, in the context of when it's said, it has its own meaning, but to me, it's almost kind of a little bit like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, just tiny bit.
Yeah, and yeah. That's. I don't think there's much more to say than that. I'm unfamiliar with
exactly.
the cultural implications there might be with including something like that. But yeah, poets definitely they're very prominent in the story and storytelling in general. Like Odysseus is kind of a poet. He tells his own stories, and of course, since this would be sung, even though the poet is singing as Odysseus in the story is still singing as represented by the poet. So all of this is being sung.
There's just a lot of, like, almost kind of like, chicken egg is not the, like, analogy that I really want, but just that very kind of cyclical, it's about the poet, and he's the poet, and the poet is in here, and the poet is telling us this, and it just goes in this, like, loop of, like, so many poets.
They're definitely layers deep into the inception. There we go.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Inception was exactly what I was going for there. Thank you. Thank you. Very good. Very good. Very good.
We've gotten deep. So yeah, Athena is doing Odysseus's chores a little bit again at the start of the story.
Athena is like, I'm telling you, Athena is very, like, has helicopter mom energy. She will do everything for you. She just wants to see you succeed in life, okay?
The book opens with Athena going around, appearing like the royal messenger. She goes to each man and says, this is, like, really early. Like, "My lord, come to the meeting place to learn about the visitor to our king's home. Despite his wanderings by sea, he looks like an immortal god." And this gets him, like, a bunch of attention, and she makes him look really cool. And so yeah, Athena is already doing work, like, at the crack of dawn.
She's pouring on the good looks.
Since Dawn is a real person, saying the crack of dawn really has wildly different implications now.
It sure does. So all of these people are gathered, and Alcinous is, telling them how we have a guest, we will assist him, but first there will be feasts and games. Feasts and games. We love feasts and games. I love feasts and games.
Yeah.
As we've established, you clearly love the games part.
Yeah.
As do I. Feasts and games are fantastic. And this is when he calls upon Demodocus, the poet, to sing beautiful, beautiful songs, which he does. And the song that he chooses to sing, hilariously, is about the quarrel between Achilles and Odysseus.
Yeah, very, very on point. So the other thing that is noteworthy about the poet is that he's blind.
Yes.
I think it's interesting, or it's odd the way this is phrased. I actually did not look this up against the Fagles translation that I have at home. This is line, I think, 63, talking about the muse. The muse gave him two gifts, good and bad. She took his sight away, but gave sweet song. I find it odd that these two things are gifts. Having your sight taken away doesn't seem like a gift to me. It's kind of unfortunately it's kind of a dead end for us because we don't have like the original Greek and stuff like that on hand. But
Sure.
That phrasing stood out to me. I have that word circled in my.
It stands out to me too, and I think there's like a certain sense to me that so it says two gifts, one good and one bad, but I think in a way that you can kind of I don't know. This is possibly or probably me just speculating, but the bad gift of taking someone's sight away can also amplify other characteristics of that person that they used to adapt to that state that can be seen as incredibly positive, including an increase of perception and the ability to have more focus on the gift of sweet song. Because he may be missing the sight, but he is certainly not missing that gift. And so it can almost serve to amplify it.
He's like Daredevil, except he's a singer.
Honestly, kind of. Yeah, I think that's actually a little bit of, what that is getting at. By bestowing the bad gift upon him, it also gives him the potential to put that good gift to incredible use, which he clearly does, because as he sings about this conflict between Achilles and Odysseus, it brings all of these emotions out of Odysseus, and he uses this purple cloak that he has to cover his face in shame and embarrassment because he doesn't want to be seen crying. And is intermittently pouring little bits of wine out for the gods, which I love. And each time the bard kind of pauses at intervals, and each time he does this, Odysseus kind of looks up a little bit, and then each time he starts back up again, he starts just sobbing again. And nobody really notices this except for Alcinomus, who finally noticed that his guest is sobbing his eyes out.
I mean, this scene is very familiar to us, right? This is Telemachus through and through, right? This is what happened.
Absolutely. Father like son, the nut does not fall far from the tree.
Yeah, only in that scene, Menelaus was also crying. Everyone was just having a really intense cry. Whereas here, Odysseus is
alone.
He's alone. He's alone in his grief, I guess is a good way of putting it. This man is a stranger, and it's I guess when I think of it that way, it's how do you explain your grief to people who are strangers and just around you and strangers?
Yeah.
I think for Odysseus, it makes. Yeah. I mean, also, I imagine I don't know if it's bad manners to cry at the table. This was also mentioned by Nestor's son.
Some people despise crying at dinner time.
I think this was mentioned by Nestor's son at Menelaus's table, and then Helen mixed up the grief taking drugs and everything was good. But
I mean, I would also kind of imagine that there is also still kind of an element of self-protection here. It's like if he's crying really hard and they can see him crying, they're going to ask him why he's crying and what has gone on and why he relates to this story, which then might make him, more vulnerable to people knowing who he is, which could be a danger for him. And as we know, as we just talked about very shortly ago, like he is suspicious of everything and everyone.
Yeah. Again, the way Odysseus views the world, if we're to like read this sort of self-protective move as like a shield against, the kinds of suspicions that Odysseus espoused in the last book, once again, these are not what's the word I'm looking for? Verified? Yeah, I guess for lack of a better word, these are not verified, right? Because Alcinous doesn't like, hey, what are you crying about? He does a good job, right? He's like, all right,
Yeah.
time to move along here. We're good with music now. Let's get over to the.
Let's go to the games.
Let's go to the games. Yeah.
Let's go to the games. Which, like, that kind of touched my heart a little bit. Is like he sees his guest is crying, and instead of drawing attention to it, he's like, "All right, we're moving on. We're just gonna move on. Nobody notices anything. It's good. We're good."
Yeah, yeah.
And he moves on to the game, and this is when Euryalus,
I think I have it. My brain says Euryalus, but
Euryalus, who's one of these young men of Phoenicia, calls Odysseus out and is like, you probably don't know anything about sports. We're buff young men. We are good at games, and you're probably bad at games. You're not an athlete. And this is after Odysseus is kind of, I think they ask him if he wants to play in any of the games, and Odysseus is just like, I'm suffering, and I've been suffering, and I'm a mopey lion, and I don't want to participate in this. And this is when this kid kind of hops up and calls him out and is like, yeah, you're probably just, scared because you're not an athlete. And Odysseus claps back.
Yeah, here it says Odysseus thought carefully. He had a plan, and he answers with this, or rather, excuse me, this is before he claps back. This is when he's like, I want to go home and all that stuff. What do you estimate is Odysseus's plan?
That's a good question.
I tried to do a little bit of thinking about this as I read it. I didn't, unfortunately, I didn't come to anything tremendously conclusive. The closest thing I can think of is that he sort of goads Laodamas into mocking him, and then he can get more gifts. Like that could be something that he could do.
That's entirely possible.
Yeah, that's
yeah. I don't know about that, and I think I kind of just like took that line for granted as just an offhand. Like he had a plan to kind of get out of it, to get out of playing in the games because he didn't particularly want to. But I don't know. That is, I think, a really interesting thing to ponder on.
I mean, it seems like he's like generally interested in. I don't know, he seems to have some interest in the games. Once again, I don't know. It is kind of cute how Athena is just always there, right? Like the first thing he does is he throws the discus and it goes super far, and Athena, I guess, just appears there as a person and is like, man, this was thrown really far. Oh, how amazing.
It's like Athena at times reminds me of like the genie in Aladdin, like the original animated one. No, the Robin Williams
so
genie,
true.
where he's like always there, like rooting on Aladdin in various, Robin Williams voices. Like I get serious vibes of that from Athena.
Yeah.
Because it really is that. Like, she is always transforming into these people. This little pigtailed girl and, the guy in the stands rooting him on.
If only we could have Athena voiced by Robin Williams. That'd be...
Oh.
It's too late, though.
My heart. Oh, my heart. I would love nothing more than that. So, yeah. This is a really interesting, Athena just pops up everywhere and is cheering him on. And, I mean, like, in fairness... Odysseus, like, ultra yeets this discus and then turns to all of them and is like, yeah, I don't think any of you are going to be able to match that. But, like, what other things would you like me to beat you in?
Yeah, and I guess I'm still trying to parse what Odysseus's end here is. Yeah, like the biggest thing that he gets out of it is like a cool sword from Laodamas, who eventually like apologizes for being rude to him.
I mean, I think there is part of me that does kind of find him earnest when he's talking about like how he doesn't really want to participate in the games because he's missing, like, I think this is one of the kind of events that draws focus to him.
Rylus, pardon me.
Yeah, but I think this is one of the things that kind of points to like he has been through so much and he is really harping on the suffering that he has done and his desire to get home. So I think this draws attention to the fact that like he has grown as a person. And maybe in, the earlier parts of his life, during or before the war when he was in his fighting prime, he would have wanted to make a show of these games. And he doesn't really want to now because his mind is focused on home and getting home and the suffering that he's been through. But then when these young dudes like challenge him, he's like, "Oh, you want to play? We'll play. But I really just want to get home. But if you want to, play that game, then I'll kick your ass. And then I'll continue focusing on how to get home."
I guess I'll have to think about it. I'll probably mention it in the next episode after I've thought about it some more, because I guess I didn't think I'd focus on it as hard as I did. But I guess we can put a pin in that one as well. What I there's one thing I would like to point out also. So at before the games begin, let's see, where is it? Yeah. This is around line 11, or not line 11, line 100.
Just say like, yeah. You're going all the way back.
So after like this is when Alcinous is like, "Oh wow, our guest is crying. Let's move on to the games." He says, "Let us go outside and set up contests in every sport. So when our guest goes home, he can tell all his friends we are the best at boxing, wrestling, high jumping, and sprinting." However, when we go to line 245, once Odysseus has pretty much crushed everyone at everything except for sprinting, Alcinous says we are not brilliant at wrestling or boxing, which is the opposite of what he had said earlier. He says he can tell all his friends that we are the best at boxing, wrestling, high jumping, and sprinting. He didn't sacrifice the sprinting.
I think he's definitely saving face a little bit there.
Yeah, and he follows up with, "Oh, we're quick at sprinting," and all that. So I don't know, like there's
But what I think is especially hilarious though about that is that like right before Alcinous goes into that, Odysseus is basically saying, anything you can do, I can do better. Except for the foot race, the sprinting part of things, because I didn't get to do my exercise routine when I was on my ship. So I think my legs are kind of puny. And this is when Alcinous takes the opportunity to say, "Yeah, well, we're not so good at everything else that you've just kind of kicked our ass in. But we're still good at sprinting, which you've just expressed doubt, that you can do." So I think that in that light, it's even more kind of hilarious.
Or excuse me, he doesn't actually he doesn't actually compete. He just throws the discus really far. So yeah, excuse me, he's listing all the stuff that he can do. I don't know if I want to. I wonder if this is a part where it's like we don't really know what Odysseus is thinking. Like, is he just kind of being an asshole? And like, oh, I have the opportunity to flex on these like people who are like tremendously isolated and probably are not like the world's greatest at sports, so I can show off and beat them. Or is it like he was just sort of set upon and he does have like a real outburst, or is it just all performative?
I personally, and this is totally opinion, I don't think it's performative. I think he's sitting there and he's just like, "I'm a guest in your place. I want to get home. You are like helping me do that, but these young bucks want to challenge me and I am going to embarrass them." Because I don't think this is necessarily directed at like Alcinous or the rest of the people there. It's more directed at Euryalus.
There's like, I guess that's kind of what I've been meaning. Like there's like either reading has merit depending on how you want to like understand Odysseus, and they are diametrically opposed, right? Either this is earnest or this is, they said, like it's performative to some end. that Odysseus wants. Perhaps he wants to like show himself as better, or what have you. So
in today's episode, I will go on yet again about the prospect of, mutual exclusivity, because I think while they are in ways diametrically opposed, it does not necessarily mean that one cannot exist if the other is true.
Well, either so like it says he has a plan, right? Like he has a plan. So perhaps his plan is to goad them into challenging him so that he can put on this incredible display. Or he's being earnest. I don't think those two can exist at the same time. Like either he's planned it or he's I
don't know, man. I think you can be earnest and still a little bit cheeky.
Yeah, but again, like it depends. Like has he planned? Like is this something that
it does?
He's
I'm
designed,
just saying.
I
think I'm trying to get you to see a little bit more gray in it, though. Like I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure that I subscribe to that same belief. But I think this is something that we can kind of put a pin in and come back to, because I do think we will get more examples of this, exactly this kind of situation where it really can be interpreted very differently. But I also think that the different interpretations can potentially live in the same space.
I suppose. I'll keep a finger on it.
Please do, because I think it's a really interesting conversation to have. Like, I think that there's definitely points that you make that, like, I need to think about as well. So yeah, we'll definitely, I think we'll put a pin in this and kind of revisit it as we see more examples of potential situations that are similar. But in any case, they get past the games, and Demodocus, the bard, comes back and starts singing a song again. And this is where this book is kind of hilarious towards the end, because the song that this poet sings is about a tryst between Ares and Aphrodite, which is absolutely hilarious, because Ares and Aphrodite decide to bang in Hephaestus's bed. And the sun god sees this and, like, tattletales on them to Hephaestus, who then lays a trap which captures the two lovers and, like, embarrasses them in front of all of the gods, I think. Keep in mind, this is all a story being sung by a bard to, like, all of these people.
I'm still not totally sure what to take away from this. This is a story about a tryst. If we want to, I guess, abstract it, this is about someone who nobody expected to be able to, I guess, for lack of a better word, fight back or get some kind of vengeance or bring about some comeuppance for this dishonor, I suppose. Both on Ares and Aphrodite's part, where they're banging on in his bed. He sneaks away. He makes chains that hold them, and they can't break. So he doubles back and is like, "Aha, there you are." And then eventually, Poseidon. It is Poseidon who convinces him to let him go, and he does. And I guess I'm unsure of what to take away from it. Aside from it is a funny story.
I mean, I think this is honestly kind of just a description of pure entertainment. I have a feeling that there's probably some kind of, meaning to it being put in here, but I don't know that I can tell what it is, because I was too busy just, like, laughing at the story itself within this song. Because, I mean, it's great, Hephaestus catches them, all the gods are like, oh my god, look at this trap that Hephaestus set for them, and he caught them, that's hilarious. And then Apollo asks Hermes, like, if he too would like to bang Aphrodite. And Hermes is just like, oh, if only, I would suffer many things to, like, have a chance at that. And then Poseidon's like, all right, let them go. And I mean, there's obviously, like, there are moral lessons within this, because the gods make direct references to, the moral lessons to be taken from this. Thinking in particular about, it is disgusting bailing scoundrels out. Crime doesn't pay, the slow can beat the quick, as now Hephaestus, who is lame and slow, has used his skill to catch the fastest sprinter of all those on Olympus. Ares owes the price for his adultery. So there's, moral lessons and stuff, which I think would be kind of part of the bard's job, is to use song and storytelling to instill moral values in the people that he's singing to.
If we want to abstract it even further, we can see the I guess since we've been tracking the trait of cleverness, Hephaestus is demonstrating the kind of cleverness that you would expect from Odysseus or like Penelope. This is if anything, this feels like a very Penelope move. It seems like something she would do.
Yeah, a little bit. I think this is also, I mean, like the Hephaestus who is lame and slow used his skill to catch the fastest sprinter gives me like tortoise in the hare vibes, but it's just like a sexier version of that.
I mean, I guess if we want, the object lesson is simply that, if you're clever, you can get the things that you want, even if like the strength of your arms or whatever is not purely enough, which is again kind of it's kind of Odysseus'
and that
story.
People who are messing around and getting off to no good, like, will get their comeuppance.
I wasn't gonna say anything. What are you talking?
It was unintentional, but phrasing nonetheless. And then Odysseus and everyone else listened to this song like perfectly happily. And Odysseus, asks, or not really asks, but kind of says, you said your dancers are like the best, so what about that? And just how impressed he is by like all of the entertainment that's going on. The king is very happy about this and goes back and mentions, this guy's Alcinous really likes Odysseus.
Mm-hmm.
And just keeps saying, how many gifts he wants to bestow on him, and that Euryalus should apologize and give him an extra special gift since he was mean to him.
So one of the takeaways that I guess we can have here is that it's possible that the king is showing off just a little bit. He likes Odysseus, as you said.
Wants to make a good impression.
Wants to make a good impression. And it's possible that he wants, again, like we take knowledge of places for granted. So if someone is like coming there and like Odysseus is clearly someone, they haven't yet asked who he is, really. Well, they kind of have, but
they have, but not in a probing way.
They haven't insisted on it quite yet. But Odysseus is clearly someone. He's well spoken. He's well mannered. He looks like a god. With that in mind, showing off to someone who will then take his experiences elsewhere and will probably share them there, is probably like a big deal, right?
Oh yeah.
So like it makes sense that Alcinous would, as you said, try to save face when Odysseus makes his incredible claims that he can like destroy all of them as he like chucks the discus further than anyone else can, or you like bring out the dancers, have the poet sing us more songs and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for the idea that like the person who everyone benefits from the guest stranger ritual and kind of those rites of passage, because not only does the guest get the aid that they are seeking and the hospitality and all of that, but also it serves to enhance the reputation of the host and to have the guests leaving saying this person was amazing. It's like a 5-star hotel review.
Yeah, sort of. Although again, I think that's what's happening is like a little bit beyond like the whole like Zindia thing. We can read Alcinous's actions in like different way. Like would he have like thrown these games and stuff if Odysseus didn't seem like he was important. Someone or important? Probably not. So Alcinous's actions are, or can be read as like very political in motivation, or as in a way like as calculated or similarly calculated as like Odysseus's words, right? So there's, and again, like this is stuff that you can read into, right? Like would this be done this way? Would this be done that way?
Yeah, but I'd like to point out that like before when we were kind of talking about like whether what Odysseus was doing was performative or not, and I was kind of talking about like it kind of has to be performative. It's part of the act. Like each person within the Xenia and this guest right, and I'm not sure that it is necessarily going that far beyond that threshold because I think that Alcinous is playing his part as well, that it is expected of the host to kind of beef things up a little bit to give a better impression, to treat someone of importance like that so that they can kind of brag about their prowess and brag about how awesome they are.
Yeah, I guess I don't see this being done for someone who doesn't, I guess, seem important. So there are so
Yeah,
there
but
there are
we've
new
also talked about like
motivations.
the possibility that someone could be a god in disguise and how you don't want to
Wait, oh,
take lesser measures with that person because you truly don't know if that could be the situation.
yeah, it could be. And it could be that that is why Athena makes him look like greater and stronger. Because
Yeah.
people, which I mean, again, regardless of whether he is like a real like a real important person or if he is a god or if he's just a nobody, like that changes how, or it seems to me like it would change how they interact with each other. Like it is not just, it's not just the honoring. It's like when like if you donate to charity, right? Like you always say like, oh, donating to charity is very good because there are people who need things. But you can also say, well, maybe you're also doing this because like your religion says that you ought to do this, and so you have been conditioned to feel good while doing it, and so this is as much for you as it is for whomever it is you're
I
donating money
know. I
to.
think what I'm saying though is that that's part of it. I don't think it goes beyond it because I think that's part of it.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, I suppose
That's
so.
just my opinion. I mean, but that is kind of like I think it's almost like acting. Like you are playing your part in that. And I think that's just part of it. Like everyone is kind of assumed to have a self-interest in it because that's it's like I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine in a lot of ways.
I guess so. I mean, I don't think there's really a tit for tat going on here with Odysseus. This seems like something that would,
It's not a literal transactional thing
yeah,
though. And this kind of gets back to what I'm saying about like it allows them to present something. It's not necessarily a like this guest will give me X thing and then I will get X thing from them. It is just like this allows me to play my role in this and this is the list of, this is a possible benefit that I could gain from it and this allows you to play your part in this and these are the possible benefits that you can get
yeah.
from that.
And I guess I'm not, if I'm implying like a real value judgment, I don't think I am, or I don't want to. Because like like we've seen the different examples of what a host might do, right? Like again, Nestor is very like straightforward and practical, and he gives them like a carriage, and he basically sends him on his way. He says like,
Yeah.
"Hurry up!" Like he sends him with good advice. Menelaus is like there are some cracks that show he wants Telemachus to stay around for a long time, and Calypso just like straight up keeps Odysseus for like 8 years or 2 years or whatever, or however long, and like these are all motivated by something that's more than just, again, like we would like to think that like everyone's motivations or like when you donate, like I use a donating to charity example. Yeah, like we would like to think that like people who donate to charity are doing it for like totally pure altruistic reasons, but chances are high that if we interrogate those reasons, we'll find that there's like some like gratification of self or some fulfillment of duty that goes a little bit beyond one's pure good-hearted intentions that we would hope that they have, and so on and so forth. This doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that like these sorts of
Sure.
things are being, I guess, demonstrated. Menelaus wants to be closer to the son of the man he very much loves. Nestor is a giver of advice, and so he sees this exchange with Telemachus as one thing, as that giving of advice, giving of things that are very practical. Calypso just wants Odysseus, and if we want to read something into Alcinous, Alcinous is king of a very isolated place, and so this important person being shown all of these wonders that this place has might make the place or might do well for his kingdom's reputation.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's just a theory.
Indeed.
Game theory.
Oh, no. No. In any case, yeah, I think that that's a really interesting point to ponder on as well. And yeah, let's get back into it. I mean, not that we're not, obviously we're still getting into it, but let's sally forth.
Hey, we finished with a song.
So yeah, we get all these gifts, Euryalus apologizes and gives him a special sword. And he thanks him for that. And they, set a bath out for him. And he is yet again bathed by some slave girls. And then Nausicaa comes up to him and says something which I think is really interesting. She's amazed to see him. I get this feeling that she like kind of has a crush on him.
Yeah.
Like, almost like a teenage girl crush on like this interestingly mysterious and kind of very attractive man that has come up out of nowhere and jumped out of a bush. And but now is, standing here much more clean and tidy as when she first met him, and she's just very fascinated with him. And she says to him, "Goodbye then, stranger, but remember me when you reach home, because you owe your life to me. I helped you first."
Yeah, it's a very again, I'm still not sure like how old exactly Nausicaa is, but it feels like a very precocious thing to say.
It does.
Yeah. Also, it's interesting that Arete, she gives him a chest, and she says, "Watch the lid and tie it close so nobody can rob you as you travel when you're lulled to sleep on your black ship." I'm curious if she's talking about, because they're providing the crew. They're providing the crew of 52 people, 52 men. And she still tells him like keep it closed. These are her countrymen. Like, but she if with cleverness, there also comes this sort of natural suspicion of others, which I feel like all of these clever characters sort of share to some degree, Penelope and Odysseus specifically. And if Arete is as clever as Athena has said, this is like a little example of that. But like both with when she finds a little hole in Odysseus's story, where it's like, oh, you came here, you're washed up on shore, but and yet you have these clothes. Like, how is that? Right. And here she's like sort of expressing a kind of suspicion, if we want to keep using that word, that her husband does not outwardly express in any case. She is like, keep this closed and make sure it's locked.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's entirely possible that Arete is perhaps a little less like naive and trusting than her husband. Knows that, a crew of 52 sailors may not all be the most trustworthy people, nor may, the people that Odysseus will meet along the way. Not everyone is necessarily going to be as awesome as we are on Phaeacia. And, keep it tied down. Watch your butt.
Yeah, it's just interesting that it's said, because it doesn't need to be said here, right? Like we have, like, he has his bath, and then she packs gifts in him, the clothes and gold. And this does, like, you could cut that out and you wouldn't really lose any information. But you still have this little part with Arete who's like, careful with this. Like, people might try to, like, some people here might try to steal it. And it's just there. And I think that's, like, it's pointing to something.
Yeah, and then, so this is the part that kind of brings us to what will lead us into one of the greater portions of storytelling that are to come in our next episode in the next two books. But this all kind of starts with Odysseus. So they go back to the bard and they feed him like really good meat. I'm so hungry thinking about it. I'm ready for some dinner myself. And they feed him well, and we get back to those lines that you mentioned before around 480 about poets are honored by all those who live on earth. The muse has taught them how to sing. She loves the race of poets. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And then Odysseus, and here this is, another place where we get this epithet, the clever mastermind of many schemes, asks the blind bard to sing them the story of the Trojan horse.
My characterization of Odysseus is still like, I'm still trying to keep it loose, but like it is very difficult to ignore all of these things about him. We can read this as another expression of suspicion about the bard. So when he says,
if you can tell it as it happened, I will say that you were truly blessed with inspiration.
Again, he opens with flattery, right? Like it's disarming, right? Flattery is disarming, and he does this, and then he says, "Oh, tell me about this thing that I well." He doesn't say that he knows, but like
that we know that he knows about.
Yeah. So you're like, I'm going to test him. Like he's always doing this. It's always what like he can't help. It's like he's like the suspicion. Like if Athena's a helicopter mom, then Odysseus is like the suspicion dad. Like he's always like eyeing everything with like this or with like this lens of a cynicism, almost like the cynicism toward his fellow man. Again, like it's not said necessarily that he's like trying to test this guy to make sure like he's the real deal, but he kind of is.
He's a slightly more chilled out version of like Dale Gribble in King of the Hill.
I haven't watched it.
Oh my god.
Sorry.
Okay. I'm just gonna glance over that and wonder to myself how people have missed out on that amazing fucking show. But
I intend to watch it eventually.
So Dale is very kind of comically suspicious of everything, is very conspiratorial, and I don't necessarily think Odysseus is that, but I do think that there are little shades of that at times.
He does it all the time. I think he's doing it here too, which again is why I'm like tempted to read even like the simplest things by Odysseus as like sort of cynical. That's the word I'm looking for. Not cynical. Yeah, a cynical way of approaching things. Where it's like, okay, if I do this, then I can get this, and that's that.
I mean, I think I would agree with that completely. I think there is an incredibly cynical side to Odysseus. But that being said, if I had been through what he's been through in his life, I would be pretty fucking cynical too.
We'll leave it at that. We can talk more about it in depth.
As we
get more into this. But
so the bard sings this song about the Trojan War and like hits the nail on the head, and once again we get weepy Odysseus just absolutely like, and which kind of cracks me up because I'm like, you brought this on yourself. You literally asked him to tell you this story, and now it's like hit you absolutely in your emotional core. And it literally describes him as like a woman who, has been told that her husband died in battle, and the absolute like wailing and despair of that moment, which is intense. And it makes sense because Odysseus has been through this in real life, and like I almost think of it as kind of like PTSD like. It's like he's almost kind of having flashbacks of this as the bard is like hitting every note of exactly what happened.
If we were better readers of the Odyssey, that's something we could probably the Odyssey almost certainly has been examined in this way, right? Like Nestor and Menelaus absolutely. And Odysseus are all veterans. They've experienced terrible war, they've experienced terrible loss, and we sort of get to see that like all over the place in how they act.
Yeah, and it's kind of one of the things that like really interests me after just having read the Iliad so in depth before this, because like, man, these guys have some serious war trauma.
A lot of baggage.
And it is like fully on display in the Odyssey. And coupling that with the sense of like really wanting to get home is really, really emotionally impactful.
I guess I never really thought of the story as like a veteran story.
It really is,
But it
though.
is. It is if you want to read it
Like,
that way.
he's fought in this 10-year war and gone through all kinds of insane shit and then spends another 10 years trying to get home and basically being tortured by the gods in the process of doing
Yeah.
so. It's kind of horrifying.
It's a little
And
sad.
it's makes it really nice that, Athena is, I'm going with this analogy now. I'm sorry, Dr. Tan, that I've ruined probably another thing for you about these books, but I'm going with the Robin Williams genie as Athena because I can't unsee it now that I said it out loud.
He has a genie he doesn't know he has with him.
He's got the genie. It really is such an apt description, though.
Yeah, I dig it. I mean, it's wild that Alcinous is the only one who notices that Odysseus is crying, but
Yeah, this happens both times too.
yeah, like the host is the one who notices, and this is what prompts his like our sort of closing passage.
And it's interesting the way he brings it up because he says, stop the music. Not everyone is enjoying this. And this should be a happy time, and everyone should be having a good time. Odysseus, again, is the one who asked for this. And then, so, like, this gets into whole portions of what I think are, like, the kind of instruction manual-y, or not necessarily, but the exemplification of these guest rituals and traditions. Because, like, around line, 547 or 8, any man of sense will treat a guest in need like his own brother. And right before that, the send-off party and these precious gifts, which we give out of friendship, are for him, our guest of honor.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so it's just hammering that message home over and over and over.
Well, I will point out that this part is followed by a sort of confrontational tone, where he said, like, any man of sense will treat a guest in need like his brother. Is a stranger now, answer all my questions clearly, not with evasion. Frankness would be best. So he is wise to the fact that Odysseus is playing around a little bit, I guess. Like when they asked him initially, like, oh, where'd you get your clothes or whatever, he like goes into this like whole long story where he doesn't exactly tell them where he's from, but he does sort of answer one of Aride's questions. He like, she asks him a series of questions, and he kind of sidesteps them, but then he really answers like, where'd you get your clothes? And that is enough to like satisfy the matter for the moment, which is like that's one way of getting around a question or a series of questions, right? If someone asks you multiple questions and you don't want to answer all of them, you can answer one, which is kind of what Odysseus does. And perhaps Alcinous was wise to this. Perhaps he just sort of let it be because, sometimes people want to be dodgy, but he is like this kind of statement is recognizing that Odysseus is being a little evasive with what he said, with what he's been saying, and so now he wants to get a straight answer out of him before he leaves.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Sorry, I'm going further down here because I love this kind of closing passage and just like how much it says about what Alcinous is kind of interested in hearing, because he also goes into a little bit about how his father says that Poseidon like doesn't like them helping out strangers, and that they fear that they'll be punished for this eventually, which
is foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Spoilers
like,
for the Odyssey.
Spoilers. That's very true and will indeed happen. But they extend this grace to all of these strangers nonetheless, and especially to Odysseus here. I honestly, I don't know. I think the asking him to tell it to him frankly with kind of all of what he says about like treating a friend as a brother is almost kind of being like, you are part of the family now, you can be real with us, is a little bit of a feeling that I get from it.
Yeah, I think
could be.
I mean, if we want to read it the other way, I mean, obviously he recognizes that Odysseus is being dodgy, but if he's making like an empathetic appeal, he's like, okay, he's being dodgy because he's not sure if he should trust us, right?
Right. And this is my final time saying, like, you can trust us. Could be.
Yeah, even his mentioning that like he fears repercussions for doing this sort of thing is like a demonstration of how trustworthy he can be, right? Like, oh, I'm doing this at my own risk, so you can trust me on this.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that there is like kind of a sense of altruism that I get from him at, probing about the like evasion and frankness. I think it's kind of him saying, I mean, again, I like to speculate. I like to kind of project my own image of what's going on. I could be wrong. I could be right. The truth could lie somewhere in the middle, as is often the case. But it's just kind of a little bit of an instinctual feeling that I get about it. It's like he's just like, you're one of us now. I'm doing this at my own risk. You can tell me what is going on and who you are and like what the hell happened to you, man.
Especially since like in his outburst during the games, he said, yeah, I fought in Troy, or yeah, I fought in the War of Troy. I fought with the Achaeans, and every story about the Trojan War has him crying. So there's
Yeah.
he knows the question to ask. Yeah, that's just kind of how it ends. It ends with him putting this question to Odysseus, and we'll get his answer.
Yeah, we sure will. And it's going to be a good time because we are going to be having a guest with
It's
us.
another guest.
But much like the end of this book, we will leave that a surprise for you all. And at this point, I think is a good time to throw it to Dr. Dan. Please listen to Dr. Dan's tag. Unless, do you have any final thoughts?
No. I've done a little bit of reading ahead, so I have a sense of what Odysseus says. But yeah, like this, much like the Iliad, this story has been teasing me. Because if you'll remember in the last episode, I said, oh, maybe we'll finally get into the storytelling that Odysseus does in the next episode, and of course it gets held off for another two books. But I know that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like part of that oral tradition of like getting the bard to be able to like captivate the audience and have them hanging on their every word.
Oh yeah, sure.
Waiting for what's going to come next, and like I'm playing into it. I'm ready.
Yeah, I just thought it came
excited.
sooner, but I guess not. But it's coming now, or it's coming next episode. So yeah, absolutely. Listen to Dr. Daniel.
Listen to Dr. Daniel. Everyone listen to him. He is awesome. And yeah, with that, we will throw it to Dr. Daniel to give his insights on what we just talked about.
Hello everybody, my name is Daniel, otherwise known as Dr. Daniel, Dr. Dan, or the Dancing Grad, and I'm here to offer some thoughts on Llama and Wriste's conversation about Odyssey Books 7 and 8. Their conversation began with a discussion about how accessible Emily Wilson's translation appears to be, especially when compared against older translations like that of Robert Fitzgerald. The key to this lies not only in Dr. Wilson's choice to structure the translation in the way that she does, but also in the specific words that she uses. The word that began this discussion was the description of Athena in disguise as a child in Book 7 as quote-unquote pigtailed. Our host brought up another hair term from a previous book, namely Demeter with cornrows in her hair, and mentioned how that term also had a similar effect. These are two very different hairstyles, obviously, pigtails in Book 7 and cornrows in Book 5. However, what's really fascinating is that both terms, pigtailed and cornrowed, derive from the same adjective in the ancient Greek. The adjective in question is euplokamos, which is composed of two separate parts. The eu part is basically an adverb that means good or well, and the plokamos part refers to a lock of hair or often a braid. Plokamos seems to be etymologically related to the verb pleko, which means to braid or to weave, but often plokamos just indicates a lock of hair. So euplokamos, I like to literally translate it with my students as with the good hair. Beyonce with the good hair. Leto with the good hair is another goddess, the mother of Apollo and Artemis, who gets this epithet in the Iliad, and also here Demeter and Athena, both getting this adjective as well, euplokamos. The use of these very different terms, pigtailed and cornrowed, coming from the same adjective, really highlights the translator's role in interpreting the text and communicating it effectively to the audience. There's enough semantic range within Euplokamos for it to mean both corn-rowed and pigtailed, but Dr. Wilson's specific applications of these terms in these two very different contexts activates different associations in a modern audience's mind. In Athena's case, pigtails really contribute to her characterization in disguise as a young girl. Cornrows for Demeter, however, works in two very specific ways. First of all, Demeter is the goddess of agriculture and grain, and cornrows, in their literal sense, rows of corn, rows of crops, fits perfectly with the goddess of agriculture. Secondly, though, a modern audience cannot help but associate cornrows with a more racialized context. This depiction of Demeter forces us to think about what we think Demeter actually looks like. And in modern racial terms, our minds either go to black culture or white culture appropriating black culture. This activation of modern sensibilities seems to have been a deliberate choice on Dr. Wilson's part. In 2020, she was invited by Yale to talk about her translation of the Odyssey, and this idea of depicting Demeter as having cornrows in her hair was actually a point that was explicitly brought up in conversation. I quote the following from a summary of Dr. Wilson's visit to Yale from the Yale Daily News. Dr. Emily Greenwood, a professor of classics and of African American studies at Yale, quote, asked Wilson about her depiction of Demeter, the Greek goddess of harvest and agriculture, in Book 5 of the Odyssey. Wilson's translation describes Demeter with cornrows in her hair. And then it goes into a quote from Wilson herself. It's great if the reader can be reminded not to think of a goddess as necessarily white, Wilson told the virtual audience. Whiteness is a modern construct. If the reader does go there, I hope that it will be a productive journey to unpick potential assumptions about race and ethnicity in the ancient world and not project whiteness back onto this poem. So this is a really neat example of the ways in which the ancient world can not only shed light on history and culture and things like that, but also on our own assumptions in the modern day. On that note of cultural contingencies and norms shifting over time, a brief mention was made of the seeming incestuous nature of the marriage between King Alcinous and Queen Arete of Phaeacia. Whereas marriage today is often seen as an expression of love, marriage in the ancient world was often more about pragmatics. Marriage was much more about forming politically and socially advantageous relationships that could continue a family's line. Incest was reviled in certain contexts in the ancient world. For example, in the 5th century BCE, Athens had a democratic process called ostracism, wherein Athenian citizens could write down the name of somebody that they wanted to exile away from Athens for 10 years on some sort of potsherd or other writing implement. One ostracon, or one of these shards on which a vote was recorded, seems to record somebody trying to ostracize the politician Cimon, and the way that this person wrote the ostracism desire on the shard goes as follows. Let Cimon, son of Miltiades, take his sister Elpinike and get out, with a clear implication being here that Cimon and Elpinike were in some sort of incestuous relationship. However, that being said, the negative associations of the modern day with incest were not quite as strong in the ancient world. A quick illustration of this is the ways in which the Greeks revered the gods who themselves were in incestuous relationships, for example, Zeus, king of the gods, marrying his sister, Hera. The next point I want to address is the debate between Llama and Wriste about Odysseus and his posturing to Arete when he's asking for a ship to get home. The question, as I interpreted it, boils down to basically whether Odysseus is being performative in his request, and therefore a bit manipulative, or whether he's actually genuine and earnest in his request. Like Llama, I want to emphasize the both-and of the situation, rather than the either-or, but also slightly reframe the question in different terms. And for this, I need to draw on some terminology from theater. I was a classics theater double major when I was an undergrad, and even though I was a terrible actor, I was much better of a director than I was an actor. One lesson from basic acting class really stuck with me. Actors need to be doing something on stage in order to make it watchable to an audience. If an audience can't get invested by realizing the stakes of the situation, then they're going to tune out. The way that an actor can make this work is by pursuing an objective, a goal that they're trying to accomplish on stage, something that involves an active verb, to convince, to cajole, to wheedle, to beg, something along those lines. In order to achieve that objective, an actor can draw on any number of tactics to get at that objective. For example, if I have the objective of convincing somebody to give me something, I have at least 2 different tactics that I can employ to try to achieve that objective. I can outright command them, give me this thing right now. Or I can be a little bit more wheedling and coaxing. Can you please give me this thing? 2 different tactics aim at achieving the same objective, to get someone to give me something. And I want to suggest that it's these terms that we should think about Odysseus' request in. Odysseus has the objective of convincing the Phaeacians, and Arete in particular, to give him a ship to get home. Because he's really clever, he can then employ any number of tactics in order to achieve that objective, including, perhaps, being performative and a little bit disingenuous about his story. Another point that our host brought up was the quote-unquote gift that the muse gave to Demodocus, the blind bard of Book 8. To quote from Emily Wilson's translation, at Book 8, starting around line 62, quote, "The houseboy brought the poet, whom the muse adored. She gave him 2 gifts, good and bad. She took his sight away, but gave sweet song." Blindness could be a good thing, and could also activate other kinds of powers, as is seen in the example of Tiresias, who was blind but had the gift of prophecy. And we associate gifts with being good things, but what's really interesting is that there's actually no mention of a gift in the ancient Greek. At Book 8, lines 62 through 64, this is how the Greek reads. Ke ruxten guthen thenagon eri rona oidon, ton perimus epheles sededu dagothon tekakonte, ophthalmon menemer sededu de yana oidein. Literally, the herald came from nearby, bringing the trusty, the faithful bard, whom the muse loved very much. She gave him a good thing and a bad thing. Didu agathon te kakonte. There's no noun for those adjectives, agathon and kakon, good and bad. There's no noun for those adjectives to attach to here. No mention of a gift. She deprived him of sight, but she gave him sweet song. So here's another example of translators having that interpretive leeway. Finally, I wanted to touch briefly on the story of Ares and Aphrodite and what it's actually doing here in the story. Llama and Wriste had some great suggestions about what it's doing here. For example, the cleverness of Hephaestus might map onto the cleverness of Odysseus. This could also just be an entertaining story to lighten the mood. However, I want to tie the story into the larger arc of the Odyssey and the basic thrust of the story. Odysseus is trying to get home to Ithaca, where his wife Penelope has been waiting for him for 20 years. In Odysseus' absence, the suitors are essentially trying to get Penelope to be unfaithful to her husband. So perhaps this story of infidelity amongst the gods between Ares, Aphrodite, and Hephaestus serves as a foil for this main relationship between Penelope and Odysseus. That's about all I have for this episode, so thank you all for listening, and I'll throw it back now to Llama and Wriste.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daniel, and thank you once again, dear listener, for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion as well as Dr. Daniel's wonderfully informative expert opinions. We also hope you'll take the opportunity to continue reading along with us, since there is still plenty to love about these stories. Keep an eye out for future episodes by following us on Twitter at Homer_bound, or wherever you happen to be listening to us right now. We're looking forward to seeing you for the next episode, but until next time, take care and thank you for joining us for this episode of Homer Bound.